Hello and thank you. My name is Will Tulin, the Canadian Party and youth critic. I hail from Pontiac, Quebec, a beautiful region in our nation's national capital region. The same Pontiac where the Stay Canadian movement was born back in 1996, and where the Stay Canadian motion was passed throughout the majority of our municipalities. The Pontiac and Quebec, in general, are no stranger to having the Quebec government play Anglophone and Francophone against each other. This has continued with recent legislation and the passage of Bills 96, 21, and 40. These unconstitutional and un-Canadian bills have been met with no pushback from the federal government or the Prime Minister, the same Prime Minister and Cabinet with the mandate to defend the Canadian Charter. Alarmingly, these unconstitutional bills have been passed in the province where both the PM and Speaker of the House gained their seats. Now, if the Prime Minister and government wish to sit idly by with the passages of these legislation, then I ask them to allow for a federal referendum in Quebec to allow the people to decide their path forward. A federal referendum allowing the same notion of staying Canadian before the separatists jeopardize our country's unity. My message is to the Prime Minister. Do your job. Uphold the Charter or allow there to be a federal referendum in Quebec for declared regions to stay Canadian. It has become painfully clear that the only time Quebec enjoys the word equality is when it's used as it collects its equalization payments that it receives from the rest of Canada. We need to ensure the Charter of Canadian Rights and Freedoms is protected in Quebec and upheld. This referendum is vital for youth to stay in Canada and remain in the country they love. For too long, the youth have left their home province because of this. Thank you. I now pass it over to the Leader of the Canadian Party of Quebec, Colin Standish. Thank you.
We are the Canadian Party of Quebec. I'm co-leader Colin Standish, and I'm standing with Murtis Fossey to my left, party co-leader, and Will Tulin, youth critic, to my right, and as well joined by Keith Henderson, a member of our board of directors, former leader of the Equality Party of Quebec. Murtis is a psychologist from Ville Saint Laurent, and Will hails from the Pontiac region as a student at the University of Ottawa. Keith is a former professor at Vanier College. The Canadian Party, an official provincial political party in Quebec, offers a bold, forward-looking, federalist vision of Quebec to encourage a renaissance that makes our province a major economic, cultural, and linguistic rights hub for Canada and all of North America. We are serious, established, responsible citizens who have been abandoned by the mainstream political parties, federalist and provincial, and we believe Quebecers deserve a better option. We have created a political party since 2022 to speak on behalf of people orphaned by the political process. English speakers, allophones, French speakers, Indigenous peoples, and visible minorities. We are looking to our communities and all of Quebec society for support and input to our next steps. We are a party that stands for decency, fairness, and respect for rights. In particular, we stand for minority rights, Indigenous rights, linguistic rights, religious freedoms, bilingualism, and national unity. We are here today to implore the Government of Canada, members of Parliament, senators, ministers of the Crown, members of the Privy Council, and all Canadians to take definitive action to protect the interests of Canada and Canadians in the province of Quebec. A profound constitutional revolution has transpired since 2019, where the Government of Quebec has seized jurisdictions, notably labour and intellectual property, has a new constitutional status that no other province has, formally assists in appointing Supreme Court justices from Quebec, and with not just federal acquiescence, but with the complicity in undermining the legal, constitutional, and moral fundamentals that bind Canada together as a country. These changes place the arbitrary dictates of a party in power in Quebec's legislature at the pinnacle of the determination of human and civil rights, unbounded from the protective framework that governs all other Canadian provinces. This revolution is insidious and appears to be aimed at undermining the ability for Canada to survive and function as a coherent nation-state. Some of the most significant aspects that have transpired in the past 5 years are Bill 96 and other associated legislation spoken about by my colleagues, Bill 21, Bill 40, and also the Oath Act are fundamental and illegitimate restructuring of our society, province, and country. As well, Bill 96 in particular surgically excises the English language, speakers, their institutions, and associated civil and human rights from the province of Quebec. Bill 96 additionally diminishes the civil and human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Quebecers, regardless of mother tongue or language of choice, and ethnic background. In particular, the rights of Quebec's First Nations and Inuit communities are also diminished. The proposed unilateral constitutional amendment in itself is, of course, unconstitutional and ill-advised public policy. Changes to Bill 101's interpretive framework alongside Bill 96, the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, and other provincial laws will distort fundamental freedoms and human rights for decades and centuries to come if they are not changed. Freedom of expression, commercial expression and practice, work and employment, contractual liberty, and educational freedom are further constrained for all Quebecers, regardless of linguistic group. Bill 96 and the Oath Act, including the implied restructuring of our Constitution and Quebec's legal status. Taken as a whole, the terms Quebec Nation, only French-speaking state, parliamentary sovereignty, Parliament of Quebec, and Quebec spelled erroneously with an accent aigu, all seem to be factually, legally, constitutionally, politically, and morally confer and imply an illegitimate legal status that Quebec does not have. Additionally, the aspects of Bill 96 which purport to confer some unique and singular officialdom on the French language are either declaratory and symbolic or of no legal force and effect. These matters are simply outside the legislative competence of the Quebec legislature. The two proclamations of nationhood are seemingly defined solely by the French language, and they are twofold. Quebec Nation, Quebec is recognized as a province with a defined territory, defined jurisdictions, and legal status in the 1867 Constitution that territorializes the concept of nationhood. Nation is once again inserted in the Constitution within a binary power structure. Federal government and provincial governments, a nation is not contemplated in our constitutional framework. As well, these legislation declare that French is the only official language of Quebec, in the sense it is clearly in reference to the legally defined province of Quebec. These two proclamations of nationhood are seemingly defined solely by the French language. These amendments clearly amend and contradict Section 133 of the 1867 Constitution, which accords equality of status in English and French in Quebec's legislature, courts, legislation, and regulations. When will the government of Quebec act? When will Prime Minister Justin Trudeau take a look in the mirror and realize that he's not standing up for fundamental freedoms in the province he represents? The time is now to allow Canadians in Quebec to choose to remain Canadian in territory, rights, and freedoms. Thank you.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions sur Zoom. Si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée. We'll now turn over to Zoom. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence. This concludes the conference.